Welcome to Beyond Point to Point, the podcast where we go beyond pickup and delivery and dive deeper into the world of logistics, freight, and supply chain management. From industry trends to expert insights, we're here to help you navigate the complexities of modern shipping. Be sure to subscribe to Beyond Point to Point wherever you watch or listen to your favorite podcasts. And now, here's your host, Joe Greek.
Welcome to Beyond Point to Point, where we explore the people, technology, and strategies shaping modern supply chains. New Orleans has been a gateway for global trade since 1718. Today, the Port of New Orleans moves everything from coffee to data center equipment, and is also in the middle of one of the biggest infrastructure build-outs in U.S. port history. My guest today knows that story from the inside. Amanda Coates is the Vice President of Cargo Development for the Port of New Orleans. Let's jump into it. Well, Amanda, thank you very much for being on the show today. If you wouldn't mind, maybe could you tell me a bit about your role at Port NOLA and maybe just a bit about the history of Port NOLA?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Amanda Coates, Vice President of Cargo here at the Port of New Orleans. I've been at the port for 8 years, handling business development and various roles. We really have, relationships with ocean carriers, BCOs, NVOs, 3PLs, much like Averitt, and really staying in touch with the entire supply chain. We are handling, growing cargo revenues, supply chain issues on a daily basis. We're visiting customers, conferences, kind of one-on-one meetings with importers and exporters alike, and then also focusing on retention and then also our ocean carrier partners. And just for the history of the Port of New Orleans, so Louisiana has a central location geographically, and we serve the heartlands of America. And, the port was really positioned in this place because of geographic positioning of trade to Central America. We're very strong in Central American trade, but also that has grown to European trade. And Louisiana actually has 5 lower Mississippi River ports that are moving 500 million tons per year out of the complex. And that is 5 different ports. We're all self-sustaining, revenue-generating agencies that all fall under the state of Louisiana. But specifically, we handle containerized cargo, break bulk cargoes. We're the 6th largest cruise port. We also own the short line railroad, Class 1 switching railroad, the New Orleans Public Belt. And we have 2,500 acres of industrial real estate where we attract added value partners and tenants here to move cargo across our docks, but also kind of transloading, warehousing, and just moving cargo across our docks. So we're essentially the front door of cargo that moves into Louisiana and into the hinterlands of the U.S.
Well, I know there's a wide variety of cargo that moves through the port. And in fact, one of my favorite morning rituals, Port NOLA is a primary import destination for that product. I think you know what it is. So maybe if you could talk about that and maybe some of the other cargo and emerging markets that are really taking advantage of Port NOLA.
Yeah, so coffee's the best part of waking up, right? Is coffee. So Port of New Orleans moves roughly 15,000 TEUs of coffee. We're importing coffee. So the journey of the coffee bean, it's really exciting. The coffee comes from different locations along the equator, and thinking, Vietnam, Central America, South America, Colombia, Brazil, even in places in Africa like Ethiopia. So we see coffee coming from all over the world. It starts as a cherry seed. It grows, it goes to the farm, it's then dried, it's put in trucks and sent to the local port in a container. It is also put on ocean-going vessels coming into New Orleans. It's offloaded by our ILA longshoremen and our terminal operators. It's then picked up by our truckers and then sent to the local silo that's operated by Silo CAF, and moved into these silos where it is then cleaned, graded, and blended. It's taken from cleaning and blending to a grounding and roasting facility. That from that point, it's then taken to a packaging and distribution facility. So, roughly 66% of Americans are drinking coffee. That's 2 out of every 3 Americans in the household, and 175 to 180 million Americans. So imagine the coffee. So all of Folgers coffee comes through the Port of New Orleans. We also have PJ, for home to PJ, home to community, and some of the specialty coffees. But we move quite a bit of coffee per year, about 700 million pounds of coffee. So we're heavily invested, and there's about $1 billion in infrastructure here in Louisiana that supports the coffee industry.
Well, I think I probably put a pretty big dent in those volumes coming in. So appreciate the work that Port NOLA puts into helping getting that out to the American public. Aside from coffee, what are some of the other primary imports that are moving through New Orleans?
Yeah, so we're seeing coffee imports obviously is our first largest, but we also have steel products, natural rubber. So we're the second largest. Actually, sorry, we're the first largest port for natural rubber. So imported natural rubber comes through New Orleans, and it's taken into the tire facilities for processing. We also see steel, metals, machinery, lumber, retail products, furniture, granite, natural stone, and things like that are importing. On the export side, we're heavily weighted on the petrochemical side. So thinking resins, chemicals, products that are lubricants, products that are going off and being manufactured and then coming back as finished goods like cars and cell phones and laptops. So a lot of the resins are moving from New Orleans, and some of the exciting projects that are now moving in Louisiana. So Amazon and Meta have both announced projects in Louisiana, and so has Hyundai. So Hyundai is building a $6 billion steel mill. We've had over 80 billion in Louisiana announced projects that are for either expansion or new projects. And really, we've worked very closely with the state to align the port's needs and also what the port capabilities can handle in order to support these projects. So for the data centers, we're seeing generators and transformers that are coming across our docks. They're loading to either barge or rail or truck, and they're being sent into the nearest location for those sites. We're expecting cargo for the Hyundai steel mill to start moving pretty soon in containers. And so a lot of these plants that are upriver from New Orleans, even through Louisiana. So we serve over 30 states. We're connected to 30 states by river, and then we're connected to the entire country by rail. So we're the only deep water port in the United States where all of the Class 1 railroads are converging. And so we really use that to, offer seamless supply chain solutions and as a multimodal strategy. And so, many different plant expansions are happening in Louisiana. We see plants moving big project pieces that are required to build out the plant. So we'll be project cargo on the front end, but then also containerized cargo on the back end once they start manufacturing. So New Orleans is really a critical piece in not only Louisiana, but the heartland of America.
Yeah, the infrastructure that is set up in New Orleans is very fascinating. And, because it was based off of back in the early 1700s being like that water tradeway, and to have seen it evolved over centuries, literally, to where you're also connected into the rail system is incredible. And I think one thing I read about that the Port of New Orleans is involved with is the New Orleans Public Belt Railroad. Could you tell me a bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was an exciting acquisition. And, really what that allows us to do is offer packages and seamless supply chain solutions. So not only are we a port, we're front door, we're a landlord port. So we are leasing our properties out to our tenants. So we've worked really hard to attract tenants that add value to products like packaging, warehousing, cold storage, transloading of liquid bulk products and things like that. And so the New Orleans Public Belt historically was owned by the city of New Orleans, and that was a strategic acquisition. It was actually a swap for a piece of property along the river to the city of New Orleans, and we acquired the New Orleans Public Belt. So we are port owned and operating a short line Class 1 switching railroad. We're switching about 325,000 cars per year. We've worked with every Class 1 rail across the country. So BNSF, UP, CPKC, CSX, NS, and also the CN. And so we have two intermodal services. So CPKC is running up to Dallas and Kansas City. And then we're also offering Memphis, Chicago, and into Canada through the CN. So long-standing partnerships with the railroads. But, as you can imagine, taking on the New Orleans Public Belt, while it was a heavy lift, it really allowed us to become kind of this seamless integrator from waterside to landside, truck to rail to barge. And we really have control over the logistics of what's happening in and around the Port of New Orleans. So it's super exciting for us. And, the New Orleans Public Belt is actually the fastest growing line of business that we have today. And through, strategic investments in switching and storage, it allows us to continue adding fluidity to our gateway, but also, adding that supply chain piece of saying, we can store your rail cars, we can transload them, we can, bring them across our dock. So, really our goal is to take our properties and maximize them as much as possible, meaning we're taking the front door, that's the waterside properties, and we're moving them into the Inner Harbor Canal. So New Orleans is, it's a bend around the river, and we're strategically located in basically in three locations now. And one is the logistics hub of New Orleans. That's the Inner Harbor Canal, where we have I think 72 tenants now, and most of those are they're either FTZs, free trade zones, and they're also rail served. So any rail connectivity can come through and to New Orleans and access any Class 1 or, switch to a transloading facility or cold storage. And so really, the NOPB is adding value to our supply chain. So very strategic acquisition and like I said, the fastest growing line of our business.
It's incredible. There's a lot going on, a lot that's already been done in Port NOLA. Is there anything big on the horizon as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've grown a lot over the past couple of decades. And, that really you have to have foresight, right? And so the foresight that the Port of New Orleans has is that we have to adjust for the future. So we have a little bit of a restriction. It's a challenge for us. It's the Crescent City connection. And so that bridge goes right across actually it's right outside of our office here, but it goes right across the river at mile marker 95. So our current container terminal, existing terminals, are located at mile marker 100. So 100 miles from the Gulf Inlet, where the Mississippi River connects the Gulf at mile marker 0. The vessels enter the river, and so at mile marker 100, vessels today are coming to the container terminals and to the break bulk terminals. Vessels have gotten bigger over the past few, decades, and we are seeing vessels up to 10,000 TEUs and above. And so we can accept up to a 10,000 TEU vessel today, and we know that for the future, we have got to move our container terminal below the bridge to have no air draft. And so that kind of started many years ago. Let's call it 30 years ago. This is, there were studies that were done about where a container terminal should be located along the Mississippi River. And our current terminal is kind of a, it's a container terminal that's been shoehorned into a break bulk facility. Now we've made about $1 billion in infrastructure improvements. We have 4 new cranes. We're an efficient port. However, in order for us to grow for the future, we have to look further, right? And so back in, let's call it 2015, 2017, we started evaluating the possibility of moving our terminal downriver below the bridge so that there was no air draft restriction. That led us to looking at 5 sites. Those 5 sites had a criteria that were required for us to go to the next phase. That was, it needed to be navigable from a waterside aspect. You think, the Mississippi River, all of the sites are navigable. Well, there's currents in the river that bounce back and forth from bank to bank, and that's really important. So we needed to have navigational approval. We also needed backland for building out maritime assets such as transloading and warehousing that support all of the container cargo that's coming across the docks. It needed to be able to accept above 15,000 TEU vessels without any air draft restrictions, naturally deep, and then also within the 100-year federal flood protection. So after Hurricane Katrina, the federal government spent $14 billion in a flood protection system. Today's dollars, that would be about $24 billion. So we're fully protected. And so the site that we purchased back in December of 2021, it checks all the boxes, and it's also naturally deep at the berth. So it's within the federal flood protection. You have 1,200 acres. So just to give you a kind of context on size, our current container terminal is about 200 acres in total, with about 100 acres of that being usable container storage and space. And so this terminal, we actually will build out to 400 acres. So the site is 1,200 acres. We have plenty of land for maritime supporting activities and companies to come in. And so supporting that, transloading, warehousing, 3PL. And so the 1,200 acres will continue to master plan out. Back in 2021, we purchased the property. We moved forward with our navigational studies, which then were approved by our pilot association and through a navigational simulation. We entered into our permitting process, which has been a 3-year permitting process with the Army Corps of Engineers. We have several teams that are working on it day and night. We've invested over $100 million in this site, and we are getting ready to receive our permit for Louisiana International Terminal, where we'll build a new container terminal. And we will break ground in the fall, and then we'll go straight into construction. So we're super excited. It's definitely foresight of what is needed for the future. It's a resilient location, and I have to say, Louisiana is really one of the most resilient states that I have seen in terms of readiness for natural disasters and hurricanes and things like that. And resiliency means supply chain planning and risk mitigation. So in the big picture, it's super important to have that resiliency, noted as a positive for our container terminal that we're building, but the existing one as well, right? So we're even speaking of hurricanes and hurricane season, we're preparing every single day for hurricanes in the Gulf. We're federally flood protected. And our operators are operating on a daily basis, and they're planning for resiliency and things like that.
So that's an incredibly large expansion that you're talking about, and part of being able to grow to support the market demands with that expansion, that also comes back to your partner carriers like Averitt, I would imagine. So how do carriers like Averitt and our partnership and ability to work closely with the Port of New Orleans, how does that benefit shippers in the area and beyond?
Well, I'll tell you, cargo does not move without companies like Averitt. Averitt's been in New Orleans over 20 years, and so there's a parallel there. And the parallel is that if Averitt isn't here, cargo doesn't move. And so we have to have companies like Averitt and work very closely with the team at Averitt to be sure that we are making the right connections with customers to Averitt for transloading, for moving cargo inland, and we rely on our partnership. Averitt can call me at any time, and we call them quite honestly, and kind of rely on each other to keep up with how things are going. But cargo doesn't move without trucking companies or without warehousing, right? And that's an important part of our supply chain, is what happens after it leaves our port, our terminals. And in the hands of a company like Averitt, our customers are able to build relationships and make phone calls and have, immediate access to moving cargo into Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, anywhere that it's going. And really, Averitt has been an integral part of our growth. It's like, the arteries, right? That Averitt is a part of one of those really important arteries of the Port of New Orleans.
Well, we are excited to be a part of that system and to grow with Port NOLA. So I really appreciate the kind words there. Last question I'm going to ask you, for shippers that haven't moved cargo through the Port of New Orleans, what is one thing you would want them to take away from this discussion?
I think it's important for both importers and exporters to take another look at New Orleans. As I mentioned, resiliency is huge, right? You have to be planning for supply chain resiliency constantly, because once it's a crisis, it's a crisis. And they can't really look at solving the crisis within the crisis. And so resiliency planning is really important. And I think that New Orleans has a lot to offer in terms of multimodal activities and moving cargo by river, by rail, and by road. And so a lot of new customers that come through the Port of New Orleans, they really see that we're able to, call customs and help them kind of troubleshoot any issues that they might be having. We're very hands-on port. We have relationships with our customers and our truckers alike, our terminal operators. And so looking at the Port of New Orleans, a lot of importers and exporters have a four corners strategy, and most in the Gulf as well. But the fact that we are the most connected port in the United States, we're the only deep water port where all of the class ones are converging, that gives you optionality. So you can, discharge a container and put it into a rail car. You can put it into a truck, 53-foot truck. You can discharge the container and go directly to the location. You can take it to Averitt and transload it into a 53. I mean, we have all of the optionalities that customers need to be able to pivot in times of need. The East Coast has their challenges on the winter side. The Gulf has, hurricanes and fog. The East Coast also has fog. So we are all really subject to volatility of weather, and it's important to not have their eggs in one basket. And I think that, New Orleans has not been looked at in the past, but, we've worked very closely also with the state of Louisiana to kind of remove the red tape and move at the speed of business. So in permitting, in site selection, we have a bunch of, we have a few programs, ready sites, fast sites, that are helping the development of new sites and making the site selection process and permitting process a lot easier. We actually worked with the Averitt team and saying, hey, we want you guys to be a part of our story in the future. So, customers like Averitt customers moving through the Port of New Orleans, there's only room for expansion. So I would say take another look at New Orleans. We are hungry. We are hands-on, and we are actively looking for a VIP importer to land here in Louisiana and allow them to grow with us with a new distribution center and offer, those efficiencies that maybe they would not usually look at for New Orleans for.
Amanda, thank you very much for the conversation. Very insightful. And I just, honestly, I learned a lot about Port NOLA that I didn't know. And, the investment in infrastructure is just really eye-opening. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks a lot for having me. We look forward to doing this in the future and to continue to support Averitt however we can.
If this conversation has you thinking differently about how Gulf Coast ports can fit into your supply chain strategy, that's exactly the point. To learn more about how Averitt PortSide Services connect your freight from port to destination, visit averitt.com/portside. And be sure to subscribe to Beyond Point to Point wherever you listen or watch your favorite podcast.